It can be hard to find time to pack a lunch for work. Oh, and sometimes your coworkers will mistake your lunch for theirs. But that's okay, I'm happy to help. That's why I always pack extra. And if that method doesn't work, what I do is I pack a lunch that nobody in Vancouver will ever touch. It's delicious.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Those videos are great. I recognize that everyone's probably settling in and trying to get their lunches. And so take the time that you need. If you're able to keep your camera on, that's great. If not, please feel free to keep them off and whatever is most comfortable. So just to introduce myself, my name is Mel, and I'm joining you today as the Lunchtime keynote host for the happiness methodology talk. And so without further ado, it's also my pleasure to introduce you to our two Lunchtime keynote speakers, Emmanuel Mongon and Professor John F. Helliwell. So to just give an introduction and background to them both, Emmanuel is founder and CEO of Happier Worlds. He is a leading master planner of visitor attractions, theme parks, tourism destinations, spiritual centers, marketplaces, and urban villages. Emmanuel has also been a board member of the World Leisure Organization and the first chairman of the European Trade Show and Conference of IAAPA, the Global Association of the Attractions Industry. When asked why tackling social isolation is important to him, his response was because the opposite, social connections, is one of the main drivers of happiness. Emmanuel strongly believes that our #1 priority should be to strive for a happier world. And joining Emmanuel today is Professor John F. Helliwell, Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of British Columbia and co-editor of the World Happiness Report. John is a distinguished fellow of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. Through his studies, John aims to create positive social connections because they are fundamental supports for health and happiness and provide the best possible vaccine to prevent isolation and loneliness. Emmanuel and John, welcome.
Hello and bon appetit. Since you are all having lunch, our goal is to present and to do something a bit different between this morning where you had more presentation of isolation and this afternoon. And our main message with John and me here is maybe present you something which just changes a little bit your mindset while you are preparing this battle for social isolation. The question I would like to suggest is what if actually growing happiness was a main priority for your brand and for your project at this battle for brand battle for good? Not, of course, as a brand, you have different values and goals, but one is always to make economic results. What we say is that complementing this economic target, growing happiness could be a main priority. And it's not just a wishful thinking. It's not something theoretical or it's because I'm coming from the fun industry. And so actually, when I started my job and profession 35 years ago, this was considered crazy to say, my main goal is, and our main goal as an industry and our main goal as a company and as a brand is to make people happier tomorrow as yesterday, happier with their life, happier with their moment. And when I said that, it was like crazy. Since then, a generation of research, reports, actions, examples has proven that happiness is not just about smiling and so, but very serious stuff, which can be measured. And we know a lot more about what causes it. And guess what? The main driver, one of the main drivers of happiness is actually quite quality social connections. And as we learned this morning, it was all about how to tackle isolation and with quality social connections. So thank you, Carla, Mel, and the Brand for Good Foundations for having had the idea to invite John, Professor Helliwell, and myself today and placing this session. I'm look forward for the rest of the day. I like very much, you will see the presentation of the fluid software, which has been developed and which will be presented by Bruce Hayden at 1:50 this afternoon. Very interesting example how to really, in a practical way, measure the connections in a building which is on design. So I found that if this was a project this year, I think he could have won this battle. So your teams need to find something even better, but be careful because this was already a very good idea and it has been developed. Very interesting. Of course, a main benchmark for us in terms of measuring happiness is the World Happiness Report, and I give the floor to John for that.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I'm not sure what the best way of digging in is, except to amplify what you've already said, that if in the background you think that loneliness is an issue, you've probably already started off on the wrong foot. That if you're really trying to make better lives for people, you start by creating positives, not waiting until something becomes a negative and is identified as a problem and then cured, because the world is too full of problems that people focus on curing, when what they should have done right at the beginning is create a world in which lives are better. And I first met Emmanuel at a meeting of the World Leisure Association in Hangzhou some 15 years ago. And I was struck by the way in which he already had practical examples of doing just that. The way he was able to design rides in fairs that brought people together and made the hug in the vehicle a natural part of the process. And it was creating better lives for them. It also created better business for the facilities, but a fundamental feature was to make better lives. And equally in his work in the town square in Switzerland, where it was simply a question of making that physical space one in which people wanted to be. And he didn't flash it up as the brand. He was looking for ways of actually making this a happier place to be. And I think each of you, if you're dealing in enterprises or thinking about enterprises and what you can do within your own, you have to have that mindset. You have to learn something about what it is that makes people happier. You can't just talk. You have to get a little deeper into the science if you're serious about it. And then you have to say, well, what is it about, what can we do in the way we run our own internal business that makes it a nicer place to work? People are happier here, a better sense of purpose, which in some sense, the branding question deals with. But you don't want to build the brand in some sense before you have a notion of what it would be to operate an enterprise or create a product that in fact was going to improve the lives, not just of the people who provide it, but the people who enjoy it. And that's a fundamental change in thinking. And from time to time in the many conferences around the world I go to, I run into people who've in some sense got it. And then they sometimes find a way of spreading it. And Emmanuel is clearly one of the leaders in that, in not only energizing people in ventures around the world to take this positive approach to the way they did things, but to learn more and apply more the ways of actually doing it. There's a nice book called The Super Promoters. I met the author at a European Positive Psychology Association conference in 2013, where what he was saying is, you know, you don't need sales forces. Your best advertising is from your customers, and you take your customers seriously. He said, you don't design something for them, you get them involved in the design of what you're doing. So you actually take them seriously as designers, and they'll become promoters. You don't get them out there telling friends about how wonderful we are. You get them involved in the creation of something wonderful, which then they'll want to share. And he had a lot of evidence from examples of operations he'd worked with, where to involve the customers as actually the people you'd like to deal with on the customer side, together with the people who are actually responsible for producing the product, not only made the innovation much faster, it made it much more effective, because of course you were producing products that actually were what the people wanted to get. So going at right at the outset to whoever you're planning to deal with is to get them together with the people who are going to be working to provide it, with this notion that the more they co-create, the more they are designing something that works for them. It isn't just that it'll be a better product for them and a better idea for you, the producers. It's that whole process of co-creation and collaboration is itself a fundamental source for happiness. And if there's anything we've learned from the 10 years of the World Happiness Report, is the evidence from around the world that it's the warmth and strength and positivity and effectiveness of social connections, both in the neighborhood, the family, the enterprise, and in society at a larger level, that are the fundamental sources of happiness, where we measure happiness by simply asking people about the quality of their lives and asking them to rate them on a scale from 0 to 10. Is that enough of a starting point, Emmanuel?
Yes, and what I find very striking, and for us, of course, we come from an industry where our own raison d'être, our own reason is to make people happier. What is it's much more difficult normally is for other sectors. What I find, and these other sectors, what we suggest and what we push is, and it's especially for you, all the teams at this Brand Battle for Good, is what it begins. I saw a question, how do you do? And the start is to do the focus, to say, okay, my main goal is also happier. I could almost say is to make the people happier, but we should not forget, especially for companies and brands, that we have also economic goals. So it's one of the top 2 or 3 goals. What is interesting is that it's not something which is completely new. If we take, for example, other policymakers, for example, the people who did the French Declaration of Human Rights, which is something like very fundamental. Everybody knows that humans have different rights, A, B, C, etc. But they normally forget that there is a preamble before all these rights. There is a preamble which says the demands of the citizens, and I read it's translated in English, founded henceforth on simple and incontestable principles, may always be directed towards the maintenance of the Constitution and happiness for all. What I find interesting is they had taken this as the main goal already. What we see is that it has started with Bhutan, for those who don't know, and it was also very much at the beginning of this World Happiness Report, and many things when I met the Ministry of Tourism of Bhutan, and so this very small country, Bhutan, in the high mountains, totally isolated from the rest of the world, actually declared that instead of only having GDP, the economic measuring of the wealth of a country, they would introduce also, in addition, a happiness way of measuring called the gross national happiness. And since that was, I remember times when people say, yeah, you know, it's Bhutan, it can be only small country, maybe Switzerland because it's a small country, but not real big countries because it has other priorities and things. And actually worked. And today, many years after, nearly all OECD members countries now measure the happiness of their people annually. The European Union is asking their members countries to put well-being at the heart of policy designs. What I see, which is not yet introduced, and we think it's our role collectively, is to have commercial brands, companies to take this as a goal, to take this not only as a goal, but as a key performance indicator, as well as an economic factor. And I strongly believe that by joining those, by making an alliance between the economic factors and everything, many things have done with economics and finance and everything, and much too little, especially in corporations and companies and brands, on happiness. By rebalancing this a little bit, there should be a lot of very interesting and tangible results. What we see in our industry is really tangible results. It's economically sustainable. It's also making a lot of answers to current challenges of the world. I saw a question to say, how do you do? Because there are so many things to solve, fix, and do. The thing is to start. Happiness is not a goal, a distant goal to reach. It's something which is a path. It's every day. It starts now. And how do we do that? Do we focus on that? What does it bring? And it's interesting to see in the World Happiness Report how they did it. They asked questions in all these countries to rate these countries. And it's all about at the end, people know if they are happy and what was the day before and if they had positive or negative emotions. What I find striking for you, and I don't know, John, if you can explain that, it's Canada, which is supposed to be a country where people are healthy, slipped to this. The World Happiness Report is ranking the countries in decreasing order of happiness. And Canada slipped to number 15 or something like that.
Well, I can talk about that, but I think I'll pick up an earlier issue first, and a connection that's a fundamental question that was asked in the chat. How do you actually get people to do this if they're not being compensated? So immediately my eyebrows rise, and I said, well, go and read the reports and the underlying research, and you'll see, in fact, they're more likely to be involved if they're not compensated. If you actually pay someone to do something good, they won't get the same warm glow and they won't get the same satisfaction. They have lots of experiments where they have given people a certain amount of money at the beginning of the day, and one half of the group instructed to give it away or spend it on somebody else, and the other to spend it on themselves. Those that actually spent it on other people were happier or gave it away were happier than those who didn't. It's quite extraordinary that humans are not just social beings. It isn't just positive social connections. They're happier when they're doing things not just with other people, but for other people. And to commercialize a transaction and to offer somebody money for something they're doing because it's either the right thing or something that will make other people happy cheapens the act, cheapens the process. So don't get stuck into this prizes for good behavior is that you have to buy people's involvement in a venture of a broader purpose. People, on average, this is not true of everybody, but most people, in fact, welcome the chance to enter something that's effective in its production of better lives for somebody else. And so it has to be effective. It can't be just talk. It has to be efficiently organized. It can't be a waste of their time. But you give those things, then they'll pass it on. There are endless experiments where there you have random acts of kindness, paying for someone's order who's just in front of you, and then they say, "What can I do?" And you say, "Well, pass it on." And there are incredible lengths of these passing on. And why is it happening? It's happening because people feel a lot better buying the coffee for somebody else than they did buying it for themselves. The chance to do something for somebody else is really important. And so it isn't just how can they do it if they're not compensated. They're more likely to do it and do it again if they're not compensated, or more precisely, if compensation is simply not part of that. And so that's where you get a lot of the win-win situations arise, that a lot of these conversions of the ways in which organizations are run, products designed and delivered, are not on a purely commercial basis. The more it is cooperative in structure, it's why a lot of cooperatives do better than enterprises that are living or dying by their short-term bottom lines, as the commercial sector has become shorter and shorter term and more linked to monetary rewards, as it has over the last 50 years. It then makes it harder to create the cooperation and co-structure that's needed. The same issue is true in our universities that I'm very closely involved with. We have put individual performance above collective cooperation and achievements, and that's been not good for the well-being of the students and hasn't been good for the research and the private lives of those people. So cooperative environments of working together, which are fundamental producers of well-being, need to be sought out and built everywhere.
And you said before, a vaccine rather than a cure. I like this because it's also something where we believe, and I strongly see that it's not, the goal is not just to cure something or a misery somewhere. Of course, it's important, but the problem is by focusing on just curing a problem or misery. First of all, we tend to stigmatize the people there, and also to forget the majority of the rest, and also general policies and general programs which can benefit the rest of the population. So our experience is that when we deal, and our job is not to deal with just a couple of hundred people and as a coach or curing, but we deal with several thousand different people every day. So the question of numbers, of how many, and I think it's important for these groups of the brand battle for good, is maybe to think not only about a platform something, but to put the numbers. How many people will benefit from that? And studies have shown, and projects have shown, that if something positive for the well-being of people is done for a majority of a big number of people, then the people in misery and so benefit from that also. It's not, if not, we just take our time and energy to cure things. And it's answering also one of the questions.
I can pick up on that if you like. That one of the things we discovered, I mean, I haven't talked explicitly, and we haven't talked explicitly about trust and the importance of trust, not only in making people happy, but in making their organizations more effective. And so some of the experiments that have been done have been dropping wallets all over the world and see how likely they are to be returned. And indeed, the highest return rates are in the Nordic countries, which are the happiest countries. So these are people who are quite regularly thinking of others. And it's not because of their welfare state policies that they're picking up and returning other people's wallets. It's because they themselves are thinking about other people. That makes them more likely to support policies that help other people, of course. Well, in the study of trust, we asked ourselves this, because we're speaking, what about people in misery? Do we need to specially target them? It turns out that if your policy is one that creates those broad social connections that improve the trust that people have, in each other and in their public institutions. They're all happier. But the people who gain the most in happiness are the ones that are already in distress. So how do we know that? Well, we're looking across countries at different trust levels and different people within those countries. And the people who gain most from living in a high trust society are those who are discriminated against, those who are in ill health, those who are in unemployment, the unemployed, and those in the lowest income categories. In other words, all the groups of disadvantage that people worry about, they're the ones who gain the most. Well, you can see why. Because if there is a system that is genuinely caring and sharing, then of course they are going to be the biggest recipients. Gated communities may help the people on the inside of the gates, but they don't help the society. It's the open society that in fact supports everybody and gets the wallets returned.
Mel, you had a question. We had a very good team from Brand Battle for Good, and I think Mel had a question about the values.
Oh yeah, maybe less of a question, more just, taking into consideration where, as you were mentioning before, Emmanuel, about adding happiness as a KPI or some kind of measure. I mean, for folks that work within brands, obviously everyone here, but also from like public sector organizations, how could we incorporate happiness as a brand value if that's not already something that is within your guiding principles or isn't considered as part of a brand's overall mission statement or vision statement? What could we do to incorporate that, which would then ideally influence all departments and would disseminate across I guess across different projects and across different responsibilities in the company. And so that doesn't necessarily just stick within what would typically be a brand or a marketing campaign, like a one-time kind of execution. How is this something that they can integrate this as part of their brand identity as one of the main takeaways, and can be a consistent thing that folks are trying to strive towards regularly. But I did see that there. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Emmanuel.
No, go ahead, Mel.
I was just going to speak to a question that was in the chat, but please feel free to continue on if it was carrying from the past conversation.
Yes, what I would continue on what you said about the values is certainly what we like to see is when a company, a corporation, a brand is beginning to explicitly set this as a goal. Officially, and not as a goal. It's not a marketing campaign. It's not a known beverage which says we sell happiness. That's not the goal. It's about focusing on the people, focusing on the customers, on the employees, on the suppliers, on the stakeholders, on the community and your region. But it's really explicitly focused. Now you can say, okay, marketing is exactly about that. And we have put making people happy in our values. I would say it's not sufficient. The goal is to make it explicitly as a goal and to follow that every time. And what we know is that fortunately, happiness is not something you can impose on people. That's a good news. You cannot say you will be happy, or as a company or as a state or as a public authority, I have done this and this and you should be happy. It's a reverse. And we have learned in the World Leisure Organization, they have a charter which says the role of the leaders is not to impose something, it's just to provide opportunities. We don't know really what will be picked up. What we want is that the people develop their own talents, develop themselves. Our only role is to suggest, to make possibilities, to open, but to keep that as a focus. Of course, we need to make money, but my experience over the years is that the money comes when we focus on just that, on making people happier. The rest is coming because since they are happier, of course, they buy more, do more and everything. And at least in our industry, It's an industry which works very well. It's not very much known because people think it's about rides and fun and shows and music and accommodation and food. And no, all these are technical bricks. The very essence of what we provide people is a memorable shared experience. It's about people sharing something together. Now, it's not words. It's not something which, oh yes, of course, it's obvious. It's a shared experience. If you really look at how much time, how many minutes, how many hours do you actually share a memorable experience with your children, with your spouses and friends, with your families, with your groups around you, with your communities, how much time would you say this was really memorable? It has been a time. And what is surprising, it's relatively little actually on so many hours. And this is our role, is to say we want to increase that. So it's not about, a goal is to make people happy. It's just to help making them happier, a little bit happier for that. And for this, it's not only a question about values, having that as a set of values, is using it as a decision tool. If I have a decision to take tomorrow in my company, of course, I will be asked that this decision maybe makes money or is fit with this. But can I say, if it has to make people happier, what does it imply? And surprisingly, you will be surprised because only you can decide for that. Only each of these groups and organizations and so can implement projects for themselves. There is no, you cannot go and search for a book and say, what are the 10, 15 things to do in order to get that? No, it has to be an explicit focus, an explicit way that you decide that this will be a goal. I will do this program. I will measure if the people are happier. And surprisingly, it works when people can do that. That's what we like in this focus.
I've emphasized more than once the importance of trust in supporting happiness and also making an organization effective. We've been studying trust and its effect in organizations even longer than the studying of the creation of happiness. And so firms have said, and of course, naturally, I would echo Emmanuel when I would speak to these organizations, and I'd say, well, how frequently do you measure the various aspects of trust within your organization? And you could immediately see the fear starting to rise because instinctively, many of these managements knew that the level of trust was low and they just didn't want to know about it, or they feared that it was low and didn't want to know about it. So there is undoubtedly a fear factor that's involved, and you have to have enough modesty and enough humility and enough caring to actually get real opinions from people. And the best way to do it is not asking them to say, how awful are we, but to say, what can we do? And in your sales side, it's to make a better product for you. But among your colleagues is how could this workplace be a happier place and more effective place in which to work? And you never can ask them. This is one of the pushbacks we got when we were asking people to measure trust. They said, what do we do if in fact the trust level is low? And the answer is you immediately have to go to the people for whom the trust level is low and say, what can we do to improve it? So it automatically takes you into a flatter structure. That flatter structure is indeed a happier structure. And it's not a power structure because it really says you are dropping the reins, or more importantly, you're passing them over to somebody else to provide the direction. And that's part of the recipe for making happier people. It's also a recipe for making a more effective product into a market that wants it.
That's great, John. I did want to address a comment here, switching focus, from more private sector to volunteerism, and someone asking about how you can sustain the drive to volunteer to help folks out. Think of the influx of funds to Black Lives Matter in the summer of 2020 and how it's dramatically declined months after summer. Shelter donations and soup kitchen volunteering around winter holidays, etc. It seems to take a large amount of privilege to have the capacity to sustain and share happiness. I can only speak at least from my personal experience, and John and Emmanuel, please feel free to jump in terms of finding that space and energy to help support and encourage the continuation of happiness elsewhere. But I think ensuring that you have space and capacity for yourself, and as they say here in the West Coast, you fill your buckets, and ensuring that you have enough of that energy to support and give what you can, especially when you're just trying to focus on building your own happiness in your own life. So yeah, I don't know how this might be able to translate, but if you're able to extend that opportunity of volunteerism into the work that you do day to day, that may help to support that kind of initiative that you're hoping to take. I don't know, Emmanuel and John, if you have other thoughts there.
The capacity to help others doesn't depend on income. It doesn't depend on privilege. It doesn't depend on anything. It's innately human, and everybody has it. You'll see it in the worst of material circumstances, that the more effective people are the ones, in fact, who harness themselves to help others. We found in mental health treatment centers, the most effective people, and actually on the helping side, were those who themselves had experienced what was involved, because they really knew how to run things. And it often meant changing, making the organizations less professional, opening the doors for people, make it easier for people to help themselves and help others in trouble, because that in itself is the fastest way to get them out of their bad circumstance, help them get themselves out of their bad circumstances. Generosity is not something that flows from the top down. It flows straight out from the heart to those with whom you meet every day, whether it's in the sidewalk, on the woods, or in the jail cell next door. The story of the Singapore prison reforms is a story of converting a prison system from a hell on earth for both the employees and the prisoners into something where it was essentially for all of them creating better lives. And in every challenged institution or community, that capacity is there. And it takes some real doing and courage to do it in the face of skepticism often, and regulations and rules that are designed to make people safer, but in fact stopping them from getting together in public spaces and private spaces. We want to make it easier for people to congregate and share, not harder, under rules that are supposed to keep them safe, but in fact end up cutting their ability to innovate and to link with each other for good. And since those capacities are innate and so widely shared, there's never going to be fatigue. It's a question of, there may be a frustration because the current circumstances wherever they live or the problem they're facing have roadblocks. And to the extent you have individual capacities to think, and you can then obey and corral your own wish to help others and create some small element of good. And it's up to the rest of us, in some sense, who are witnessing this, to see these gleams of hope and good ideas, and to spread the good news about the possibilities that are there and make them more general.
Thank you, John. And I'm sorry to cut this conversation short, but we do, that's about the time that we have. And I just want to thank you both again for taking the time to connect with all of us and really sharing these really great insights. And so for everyone here with us today, participants, thank you again to Emmanuel from Happier World and John from UBC for taking the time to chat with us. Thank you both very much.